What do the stories of accomplished technologists and founders tell us about how we should build technology and the organizations that sit around it? That's the question that I am perpetually trying to answer for myself and for the founders that I work closely with. And I think I might have some useful insights for you if you want to bring technology or tech business to fruition. I have now spent dozens of hours creating a 5-part series on Fei Fei Li and World Labs. I know that dozens of hours alone does not sound like that much, but that, in addition to decades of working across similar ecosystems, founding my own tech business and supporting hundreds of other tech businesses to help founders and technologists bring their ideas to reality. I'm Dr. Becky Sage, and this is part 5 of my 5-part series into Fei Fei Li and World Labs. Now, if you haven't seen the other episodes, you will probably want to go back and watch them. However, if you want to just dive into this one and see a little bit about what I'm about, go for it. Now, I personally may not have raised as much money as Fei Fei Li, or have a global reputation like she does, but collectively, the founders that I have worked with have raised similar amounts, and they've certainly generated more revenue than World Labs has to date. I call this series, Is It Marmite? Because people love it or they hate it, which I know is a very UK reference, but hey, I'm in the UK. But what I'm really trying to get to is, are the businesses we study polarizing businesses? Is World Labs a polarizing business? And having done a deep dive, I think we're ready to answer that question. Now, to the general population, World Labs probably is not well enough known or established yet. To tech ethicists, perhaps Fei Fei Li is Marmite. There are some leading lights that collaborate with her who work for organizations that she helped to establish. But we have seen holes in the wider impact of her technological approaches in terms of the ethics of them. And it seems this might be spilling into her business philosophy as well. To the Silicon Valley tech world, she's done enough to attract $1 billion from several key players. The investors think World Labs is worth a punt. But what about me? Do I love or hate Fei Fei Li and World Labs? Well, the whole point of this is to say that the reality is obviously way more nuanced. And I think even more so in this case. So let's dig into what I think about World Labs and what I think we can learn from Fei Fei Li as a founder. If you've made it all the way to part 5, thank you for getting here. And before you get into the rest of this video, let me know in the comments what you think. Has your view of Fei Fei Li changed? Have you learned things that you didn't know already? Has it made you think a little bit differently? So now, grab a notebook and a cup of tea. It's time to reflect on the rest of this 5-part series, and hopefully we can serve up some golden nuggets and close some threads along the way. You might think that Fei Fei Li is no ordinary tech founder, with decades of world-class research behind her, a stint in a very senior role in one of the world's biggest tech companies, and all of this before she started World Labs at the age of 47. However, most studies show that successful startup founders are actually usually in their 40s, with one Harvard Business Review study showing that 45 was actually the best age. So I actually have a year to get myself back out there, and actually serial entrepreneurs do tend to have more success as well. So best start thinking of that next business idea. And of course, this makes total sense that founders who do have decades of experience, they've built their skills, their knowledge, their networks, they understand how they work, what motivates them, what matters to them, and they learn how to play to their strengths and stay resilient. And of course, all of these are really important factors when it comes to running a successful business. Now, the only thing that doesn't really trend in the right way, well, in my experience anyway, is your energy levels and those little niggles and pains in your knees and your back and all the rest of it, which definitely start to kick in at this stage. So Initially, when I thought about this, I thought, well, maybe this is something that people can't learn from Fei Fei Li, because not everyone can show up with the decades of research behind them in order to start a business. But I do think it's an important lesson. As a founder, Fei Fei Li has done the hard work. What these stats about kind of being older when you start businesses and kind of that average age being the 40s and the 50s does for me is actually means you have time. Like, you do not have to be a millionaire by the time you are 20. You don't have to be a billionaire by the time you're 25. You know, like, all of these things are crazy, ridiculous metrics that we see in the media, and we can actually fight back against those things. So in terms of that Fei Fei Li journey, she'd done the hard work. She put that slog in over time, and that enabled her to very quickly build a unicorn. It also might seem like an unusual or a difficult journey coming out of that tech space. And of course, if that's not your background, then perhaps that does seem like it's not far away. But if you're listening to this, I'm going to assume that you're some way related to technology, even if you haven't had an academic background. In the UK, we put a lot of emphasis on deep tech startups. And most of the founders that I work with have spent decades building their expertise and their networks before then spinning out a company. I was just talking to one yesterday who had made a very conscious choice earlier in her career not to go down that business route, even though it was something that she wanted to do, and now she finally is. Because what this means is you're probably building something that is truly defensible. If you've got decades of technology and research that goes into what you do, it's much harder for somebody to copy that, especially if you've protected it in the right way. And I think we can dive even deeper into this lesson with Fei Fei Li, because she spent 20 years answering one question. And through that, she developed a strong reputation, strong insights. And perhaps this is Fei Fei Li and, by extension, World Lab's biggest strength. This didn't start from what does the customer want? What is the market demanding right now? It came from a more nuanced understanding of where the market was going and this curiosity, not a traditional problem solution kind of business, although you can kind of make it fit into that. But really, it began with a compulsion to follow a deep curiosity, and everything else flowed from that. And I think that brings us to lesson 2. And while, of course, there has to be some kind of intentionality to jump into a business journey, and I would be doing you a disservice if I was to say anything other than that. So many of the successful founders that I have interviewed about their journeys have also been driven by such curiosity. It's that engine revving inside of them, really like down there in that solar plexus, driving them forwards, following some threads that might be invisible to the rest of us, but totally impossible for that individual to ignore. And they won't be satisfied until the engine stops. And there are only 2 things that might stop that engine. 1, running out of fuel, money, energy. And 2, actually satisfying it and achieving that vision. And honestly, in both those cases, a lot of the entrepreneurs I know only stop briefly when they hit those points before going again. When she discusses being a founder, Fei Fei Li says that she is new at this. She describes herself as being very green. What I think is funny is, like, you can tell she's been in Silicon Valley for a long time, because she's like, I've only been doing this for 2 years. My company is worth a mere 5 billion. I don't really know what I'm doing. And I get it. I mean, just because she's got 5 billion just because she's got that 1 billion in a valuation of 5 billion doesn't mean that she's got all of the business answers. It means that she's been able to attract that money, and she still has to actually develop and run the business. But still, these are milestones that many people will spend a lifetime working towards, perhaps hollow milestones. And I'll leave you to let me know if you think that unicorn status is a useful milestone for any founders. So strictly speaking, from the point of view of Fei Fei Li, this isn't her first rodeo. It's not her first time as a founder. In her words, she founded a dry cleaners. She founded the Human-Centric AI Institute at Stanford. She co-founded AI for All. She was part of founding Google Cloud AI. And honestly, like, of all of them, World Labs included, the dry cleaner was probably the closest experience to most people's startup journey. Because in the case of World Labs, this is definitely a case of invest in the vision and the team. There is, of course, a timing thing in terms of foundational AI models, but there's still a very, very long way to go when it comes to productization, revenue generation, like building a sustainable business model. And she's aware of that. I was questioning whether this would be funded in the UK because, you know, even some of the most accomplished academics, researchers I know would really, really struggle to, you know, even get a hundredth of this amount of money if they went in and just said, here's the vision, here's the model, here's our track record. The only real case I can immediately think of in the UK, although I'm sure there's others as well, is David Silver's Ineffable Intelligence. I guess it's the only similar case at this type of scale. If you wanted to get that kind of money and you wanted to do it her way, what you're really trying to show is this is globally changing technology on the scale of other things, and having cases where there's other things that have also, you know, been funded to this amount, that you and your team are absolutely at the pinnacle in terms of expertise, and that you've got something technology-wise that other people just don't have, wouldn't be able to have, and that you're hitting the zeitgeist at the right time, and those are the things that really allow this to thrive. Now, Marble as a product isn't even close to having a good user experience, and any revenue is likely coming from just a handful of B2B partnerships rather than the delivery of a universally loved product. Hey, I've been there. Like, this is what you've got to do in the beginning. So I guess my lesson 3 is really about ignore cookie cutter advice. But do be aware of your circumstances. Geography does play a part, for example. Startups are not one size fits all. Founders are not one size fits all. Neither are investors. Creating and growing a business is a really tricky thing to do. And if you don't play to your own strengths, you don't stand a chance. And while you're at it, lesson 3B is stop with the comparisonitis. You aren't Fei Fei Li, you never will be. So you need to develop your own path and your own version of success. And you also need to question whether that version of success is a real version of success, or if it's a kind of ego or media generated version of success. One of Fei Fei Li's biggest strengths is clearly her research capabilities. But I think that goes way beyond academic skills. I think that her number one thing is that laser focus over a long period of time, the way she was able to stick to that North Star. And in fact, I've even heard her give advice to young people saying that people need to stop thinking too much about all the things that aren't part of that laser focused journey that they're on. You've got to make the decision about what you want to build or what you're going to be obsessed with, and choose the right place and the right way to make that happen. And that might be via other workplaces before you decide to go into business for yourself. The next lesson is about just how clearly vital the right networks are. In addition to the technical reputation of the team at World Labs, it is Fei Fei Li's networks that has allowed them to get off the ground so easily. And I think that it's worth saying here that her ability to work with a wide range of people shouldn't be underestimated. She's rubbed shoulders with everyone from the customers in the dry cleaners and nurses in the hospitals to the tech bros and world-leading academics. Compared to pretty much all the other high-profile AI CEOs, she seems to be in the best position to connect to others, from the oligarchy to the immigrants. She's experienced it all, which is why I like to continue to hold on to a glimmer of optimism as I look at her capability to build responsibly. So let's be real, like everything I've listed so far here in terms of lessons you might learn as a founder are pretty much the obvious ones, the ones we hear people saying all the time. But what about when it comes to doing business ethically? Fei Fei Li continues to advocate for building responsibly. She says that every business should build its own responsible AI framework. They should build their own set of values. She's also acknowledged that an AI product is an entire system, which is something that I've talked about her kind of shrugging off a lot of the time in response to this founder blinker. Because of course, if you're building something, then your responsibility must be integrated across the life cycle. Like making sure that you're defining the problem properly, ensuring that you've got data integrity, thinking about how models are trained and built, and ultimately how they're deployed. And this doesn't go obviously just for AI businesses and tech businesses. This is all businesses. You want to think about that whole life cycle if you're looking to build responsibly. And we need business owners who are looking to build responsibly. Fei Fei Li doubles down on the need to build human-centric AI all the time, which I think we can agree, based on previous episodes, does not actually mean ethical AI in the context that we've seen here. But the part that is missing is that she's still staying silent about how this is done in World Labs. Are her investors or government stakeholders against her talking about the ethical aspects of AI? I mean, we've also got AMD and Nvidia as investors. Are they really looking for lower resource usage? I don't think so. I think what they're thinking is, oh good, another business that is building a general purpose AI tool and doing it in a way that requires a ton of GPUs. That's what they sell. So they make her company bigger in order to make their companies bigger. There are some positive signs on the cap table for World Labs though. One of their investors is Radical Ventures. They have developed a responsible AI framework which covers 3 areas: social and ethical impact, regulatory compliance, and technical risk. This essentially acts as a due diligence tool that investors can apply to potential ventures. So it assesses the ethics risks alongside other areas of business risk. Now, Radical Ventures go a step further because, of course, just a framework by itself doesn't really do anything. They use this to then identify gaps which shape the investment offer. So they make sure that the business has enough support to mitigate against some of those risks, and they explicitly earmark those things as milestones. They look at things like safety tools, diverse data acquisition, and robust validation testing. If you want me to go into this a little bit more, I am very, very happy to do a deep dive on this framework. It's something that I'm planning to look into anyway, but let me know in the comments if that's something that you would be interested in. In fact, I've just pitched it as a talk at the Royal Society in a few months' time, so hopefully I will be looking at not only this model, but the types of ethical frameworks other investors are now using. However, despite kind of some good intent here, there isn't really any clarity around how Radical Ventures are able to ensure that these ethical risks are actually mitigated. And this is a perpetual issue for early stage investors who want to hold those businesses to some kind of account, some kind of ethical framework, or some kind of impact. They will put in place clauses or agreements in those early stages. However, as the business grows, every investment round is a new set of agreements. Those smaller investors get diluted, they get less powerful, and unfortunately, ethical or impact frameworks can often meet the same fate. Now, just because Fei Fei Li is a founder, she hasn't stopped keeping her hand in on ethical AI projects. In addition to being an advisor to Radical Ventures, she has also sat on the joint California Policy Working Group on AI frontier models, which produced a white paper. Now, of course, as a founder, lobbying policy work is something that can be very useful to you, and especially if you're looking to build something which has big impact. You need to change things, or you need to make sure regulation and policy is going in a direction that is going to favor your business. As ethical founders, as responsible founders, we also want that to favor the wider world. So one of the interesting recommendations in the paper, it says laws must be designed to anticipate severe algorithmic threats that have not yet been observed in the real world, rather than just reacting after a disaster occurs. There's also things in there like mandatory disclosures, third-party audits, and whistleblower protections. However, that feels like everything is there to fight some kind of existential threat, rather than the actual real-world challenges that could be devastating that need to be in place right now. And this is really one of the big issues with a lot of discourse around AI at the moment. It's all about big existential threats, or it being the most incredible thing that's ever existed and it's going to help humankind live forever. And really, the humanity sits somewhere in the middle there. I do think that this is interesting, given that actually Fei Fei Li's stance has always been, and something that I totally agree with, which is that anyone who is kind of so focused on those existential threats, or so focused on this amazing transhumanist future, amazing, either side of that equation is really not looking at the realities of what's going on, and we need to have more of those nuanced conversations in the middle, in those grey areas, which is a very big grey area, right? In terms of like, all humans are going to live forever versus all robots are going to kill all humans. We should be in the middle. And I actually think that anyone speaking on either side of that equation are actually just avoiding the real conversations. Now, in terms of this particular group, like I said, I think it's kind of not necessarily focused directly on all of the right things, but I also fear that any kind of statewide policies that hold billionaires or big businesses to account it's difficult to see that those will be implemented, because businesses that don't really care about it are just gonna move to another state. We see that time and time again. I also do recognize something in here that I'm sure Fei Fei Li championed, because we've already heard about it in the NAIRR, is the Cal Compute, which is a public cloud infrastructure initiative designed to give startups and academic researchers access to safe computing power. So let's move on to some of my thoughts. One of my friends asked me, does doing these deep dives ever lead me to like trusting or liking a product or a business more? And my answer was like, yes. Slack, funnily enough. But I really did hate Slack beforehand. So in the case of Fei Fei Li and World Labs, I do keep going backwards and forwards, and I keep kind of coming back to the nuances of it and the reality of it. That, it's easy to look on and think, it's so frustrating. Why isn't she talking about the things that she's always talked about on, the human-centric AI and some of the more ethical AI aspects? Why isn't she talking about these things within her business? And I guess I'm kind of willing that, because I do see admirable traits. I do see somebody who has lived experience that helps her to understand humanity. I can relate to her more as a human being than I can some of those other tech bros. And her path has been carved slightly independently, although still very, very close and very interwoven. But I certainly admire her, what seems to be like an intellectual fearlessness. And she said that that's something that she looks for in other people as well. Diving into something and being able to keep your eye on a North Star for a really long time. Like caring enough about something and embedding into that. And being brave enough to go for that thing that you care for, which I struggle with. That's something that I definitely find hard, is usually the things I care the most about are the things that get pushed to the background. I'm trying to work on that, because honestly, we only have one life to make a difference. So one thing I do think, and I see this in lots of different places, is this sense of, does she hide behind the science? It's definitely a part of her persona. She has that North Star, but she also does seem to have either some blinkers or perhaps guardrails or tracks that lead her towards that North Star. and, as I discussed before, allow other people to deal with the other things. She has created certain institutions, and I don't know if this is kind of a way. I mean, I do think she genuinely believes in the things that she's built there, like HAI and AI for all. But if the things that are done there are not carried into her business, then like how much are those things actual kind of grounding principles? But I also think, how can somebody who has been so senior in lots of different roles really only be following the science? That to me doesn't really ring true. Like, being senior in any organizations and being able to jump into big roles at places like Google, being able to start a business and get an awful lot of investment, all of that shows like some very savvy, dare I say, like political movements, political with like a little p, but organizational politics, that understanding and being able to move through that type of organizational politics. Maybe the science helped her rise above that, and perhaps that's the way, but you still need to be able to navigate those environments. And then I do think this idea of intellectual excitement is obviously something that I've experienced a lot. And I became very cynical about this very early on, because during my PhD, what I saw was people who were so after that kind of scientific progress that it felt like they didn't really care about anything else. They didn't care about the culture they were building. It didn't care about the people around them. And I can remember somebody even saying to me at one point, like, well, I chose to do science because it's somewhat of a admirable profession or something like that. And I always kind of was concerned about that kind of mindset, because again, the reality is that there are ethical considerations and questions around science and technology, and it's not just inherently like this admirable thing. I mean, it's an impressive thing, like people who are smart, who are good at science, who can progress things in the field. I do see that as an impressive thing, but you need that wider context to go alongside it as well. And I think that brilliance, that scientific brilliance, is not a moral get-out clause. And so I do think that where Fei Fei Li disappoints me is in the conversations that she avoids. I don't think there's any such thing as like purely academic curiosity, even though like many people probably experience that. At the end of the day, public money is usually funding science and academic research that then one way or another feeds into some kind of public good. And therefore, like, you always have to be connected to the wider implications of what you do. And in particular in the AI world, like, you only have to read one book to know that you only need to read the papers from the institute that you set up to know that there's energy and environmental costs, to know that there's data ethics and copyright issues, to know that there's costs to people and exploitation. To know that there's like geopolitical power struggles going on around this as well. And I think as founders, the whole thing of like, okay, all these things are going on, but you can't focus on all of that because then you wouldn't get anything done. I understand that to some extent, but guess what? Like, it's challenging to do innovative things. It's challenging to do progressive things. And I think we have a responsibility to do that in an ethical way. And you can actually reframe this rather than being like, oh, these are so many extra things for us to think about. What if we actually thought about these things as opportunities? For example, sovereign technology is becoming a big buzzword because of the geopolitical factors associated with big tech and different implementations of it. I think a lot of people have realized that we're living in essentially a technocracy right now, where the big power players do have as much power as governments. And so like realizing that we no longer want the US and China to be the ones who are setting the rules, because they've been the ones with the biggest investment in this type of technology. So just using this as an example, when you see all these additional challenges, well, that's an opportunity to create businesses with smarter models. In the case of AI, like literal models, having lower energy usage, training data, that's been sourced ethically. And of course, this is just an example. Not all founders are in a position to build a new AI model. But a great problem, a great challenge, one that is going to impact all of us, is something that good founders should be salivating about. These types of challenges are the creative constraints that really allow for true innovation. That's actually exciting as a founder. One thing that Fei Fei Li has seemed to have done pretty well, at least within some topics, is using public advocacy as a founder to build out a clear personal brand. I mean, her personal brand building probably started, I'm sure it started for her way back, but in terms of her getting known, it started with the ImageNet competition and being at the center of that crowdsourcing of high profile science. But there's two things we can take from her when it comes to thinking about building that personal brand. One is perseverance and showing up and being visible over a long period of time. And the other is having clear stances, or a clear stance. There's no doubt of what Fei Fei Li stands for, or at least what she wants to be known for. And that then helps other people to understand her, to help her, to mentor her, to platform her. And she's also strategically positioned herself alongside the A+ people in her field. You don't become director of the Stanford AI Lab without impressing the right people. So her public advocacy helps to cement that personal brand. I think for all founders, there's a delicate interplay between the public brand building and then the quieter kind of industry reputational brand building. And they both work together very nicely, hand in hand, if you can do it. Depending on your own skills and the activities that energize you, that you enjoy the most, you can try to create that balance for yourself. So Fei Fei Li is a good example of somebody who isn't really about social media and focusing on that wider general public, but she does have a Substack and a best-selling book, and she is known within her field. She's done most of her reputation building, her personal brand building within the industry, but she has been aware of that wider public appeal. But I think for founders, one of the things you have to do is figure out what kind of personal branding works best for you. Are you spending more time building those connections, or are you doing it in more of a public way, which then allows you to build a reputation and perhaps make contacts that you wouldn't have made otherwise? Or are you doing a mixture of both? And I think ideally a mixture of both. I certainly, as an autistic person who really struggles with a lot of social contact and the energy draining of that, I do like to use things like social media in order to reach more people. But I don't really use it in a traditional way either. I just use it as a way to maintain relationships more than anything else and remind people about what I'm interested in, what I'm working on, the kind of stance I have. Now, there's also something about what founders should stay quiet on. And as founders, there are things that you have to stay quiet on. IP, confidential HR information, etc., etc. But I think that if staying quiet on things goes against your principles, then you've really got to start questioning whether it's worth it. And I think that that is a payoff that a lot of founders do think about and are grappling with. And it would be easy to criticize on the outside and say, why isn't somebody speaking out? I mean, this is what I'm sitting here saying. But if your core goals are in your grasp, that thing that you've been working on your entire career is right there. You finally have the investment and the team and everything else to make something happen that you've been building towards for decades. All you have to do is not talk about how you train your models and what data is used there. Then, I don't know, I question, wouldn't you probably do the same thing? Wouldn't you stay quiet about those things too? And just like Fei Fei Li, who stays loud and proud about her intellectual journey, her personal story, her views on human-centric AI, her obsession with how we're going to create the Cambrian explosion for robots. These are all things she's very clear about, very loud about, and that's why we understand who she is and what she's doing, and that's why she's been able to carve the career that she has. She does take less accountability for other aspects, the data sourcing, the environmental and human costs, and the potential for general purpose AI models to be used for nefarious purposes. even though she has come out many, many times and very, very clearly said that she doesn't believe in using AI for something that can kill people. But how do you stop that if you've got a general purpose AI? So some might say that I've perhaps unfairly focused on Fei Fei Li's journey over the other people in this business. She's only one of 4 co-founders, and I talked a bit about that in previous episodes. But it's also interesting that I have spent a lot of time talking about her versus talking about the business. And I think that's probably to do with the stage of the business. Perhaps a harsh question is World Labs actually a real business? And maybe we could ask that of many of the AI businesses. Are they actually private research organizations? Now, it's certainly a business that at this stage plays by different rules. The formation of the company is not driven by market needs and kind of an immediate ability to generate revenue, which, you know, obviously, like most tech businesses, can't immediately generate revenue. But it has been started by the needs of the technical vision. The reason that research is taking place in a startup is because it can attract more money than the academic institutions can. This allows them to get the investment they need for the large compute costs, the large infrastructure costs. And that's the same story as the shift from OpenAI, the shift of OpenAI from non-profit to for-profit. It's kind of wild, right? Just to think about that. A startup can afford more than the biggest universities in the world. And I spoke a lot more about some of the implications of that in the OpenAI video. So almost anyone in the startup space, the entrepreneurial space, the early stage investment space would be like, what do you mean somebody's got 1 billion and they still have very little traction? They don't really have a full product yet. It makes very little logical sense, but it's very normal now as part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem, and like even more so if we focus on the Silicon Valley AI ecosystem. It's the money that gets to decide who grows, not the market. The question about what the market wants no longer really applies in the AI business environment, which of course makes me think about that Henry Ford quote. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. I mean, some might argue in a grand scheme of things, a car is a faster horse. Like the way my brain works, like a car is a faster horse. What I would say about that is, of course, like I completely agree, and in the sense of novel innovation comes from a place that isn't directly kind of spelt out by the end users. But funnily enough, good human-centric design actually does take this into account. It's not just about saying like, what do you want? But the way AI businesses are grown now, the way tech businesses are grown now with hyperscaling can lead to incredibly unhelpful consequences. In Fei Fei Li's book, in response to Olga Rosakowski's focus on fairness and debiasing, she writes, with people like Olga bringing such socially conscious ideas to the table, my hope for the future began to grow again. And I worry about where that hope's gone. I don't actually blame Fei Fei Li for focusing on her passions, on being so driven to solve technically difficult problems. I understand that currently, and particularly in the US, she probably does feel at the behest of so many powerful, mostly men. Her investors, other leaders in the sector. It's not disconnected from political powers too. But I do think for each dedicated, driven academic, we need structures and innovative ethicists to set the direction of travel. So do I think World Labs is Marmite? Not yet. I don't think enough people actually know about it. I think very few people are even aware of the field of spatial computing. However, these days anything related to AI is Marmite. People love it or they hate it. It's human destruction or humans living forever. Now, Fei Fei Li has largely gone under the radar so far. In some of the circles where she's known, she's heralded as the godmother of AI, and that is partly due to her human-centric approaches. But I do still remain unconvinced. I believe that she believes what's written in her book, what she has said in her talks. But it's still, as I've already said, what she hasn't said that really screams the loudest. I do think to be senior in AI and not be vocal on some of the biggest problems is to be part of the problem. So Fei Fei Li, I have what seems to be an impossible technical challenge, but also a social one for you. How do we redistribute power from the monolithic technical companies back to the people and the planet without losing all of this great innovation? If you can start to address that, then I would be truly blown away by you. Now, if you also want to know the answer to that question or be part of the discussions that could help to lead us there, then keep watching this channel. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already. I've actually just been sent a soon-to-be published book by one of the world's leading tech ethicists, and she starts to describe some real solutions to this problem. So that's what I think. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video, all the way to the end of this series, don't forget to leave a comment, let me know. World Labs, do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it Marmite? Now you have some more information, you decide. And let me know, which other businesses should I be doing an Is It Marmite deep dive on? See you soon. I'll be back next week with the first episode of my next series. And I might tease it on my shorts, so be sure to be following along.